history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other.
It's just crazy to see how you enslaved your own damn people. Like, who the fuck? Like, these people were assholes.
Just trying to stay sucker free in a world full of lollipops. I'm seeing all the ops. Fake news, fake views. It's an illness, the cure to the sick shit. It's the pretty realist.
What's good, family? Welcome to Pretty Realist. If this is your first time joining my channel, welcome. I told y'all before that I am not in the business of creating division, but I believe that uncomfortable conversations are necessary. As long as I've been in school, I have never had a teacher tell me that there was white slaves. This is what I mean when I say indoctrination has affected this nation greatly in order to create an inferiority complex. And even in this country, the further down the rabbit hole you go, the more you realize that a lot of what we've been told is a lie, fabricated, even told backwards. And there are people who are alive today that still allow these lies to continue. That's why it takes people like myself, people like you, as well as others, to kind of erase the lines that continue to keep America divided, continue to keep cultures divided, and really be honest. This is the story of white slaves. Shout out to Forgotten History. I actually did a reaction to one of his videos before regarding Anthony Johnson and how he was the first black slave owner in our country. I came across this video. Really want to give my realist perspective on it. Grab y'all some water, some chips, some nuts, because it's about to go down. Let's get into it.
Chattel slavery is defined as the enslaving and owning of human beings and their offspring as property, able to be bought, sold, and forced to work without wages, as distinguished from other systems of forced, unpaid, or low-wage labor also considered to be slavery. Was chattel slavery among the Africans by the Europeans unique? Which cultures enslaved the most people? Which cultures practiced slavery the longest? Which slave trade had the most slaves during their history? Many believe that European enslavement of Africans was unique and the largest slave trade in history. They use the term chattel slavery denoting the method in the United States specifically. This ignores the fact that this was not unique to the North American experience. South America also had the practice with the Spanish and Portuguese. Was it unique to the Europeans? History says no, and in fact, this is a myth. Enslaving people in chains for forced labor, owning them as property, as well as their offspring, was practiced long before the European powers even first set foot in West Africa, and European Slavs were the primary targets for enslavement in Eastern and Central Europe for several thousand years by many empires. It is often believed that the word slave was derived from the Latin word for Slav as the Roman Republic and later the Empire expanded into Eastern Europe. Slavs were a primary target for their slave trade. In addition, the Slavs were themselves enslavers of others, to include Byzantine Greeks, as stated by historian Igor Froyanov. Many scholars believe that the word slave has its origins in Old Greek, leia meaning to plunder or taking booty, as well as conquer and take. The Greek.
Did that man say taking booty?
I beg your pardon?
Continue.
Etymology for the word sklavos, being a derivation of sklabinos, which translates as Slavic, originally as a self-reference for the Slavic people as Slavininu. However, Slavs had also been slaves of the ancient Macedonians and ancient Greeks, as well as the ancient Bulgars. Likewise, the Byzantine Empire that succeeded the Western Roman Empire also took Slavs as slaves, and therefore the word was used in the Greek lexicon. These slaves were in fact in generational servitude under the Byzantines, just as serfdom was also generational later throughout Europe. And these were Christians basically enslaving other Christians, but Muslims were prevented from enslaving other Muslims. But non-Muslims were fair game. The Romans took their slaves not just for agricultural labor, but also for brothels and for entertainment in the Colosseum starting in the 1st century AD. Many became gladiators, while many more were simply used as public entertainment and fed to wild animals. When the Huns arrived in Eastern Europe around 376 AD, and while not slavers as such, they did take hostages, and many of these were Slavs. Slavs, not being a unified people and just a collection of scattered peoples, were easy to conquer and enslave. The Moors from Spain and North Africa took Slavs into captivity during the 7th century and beyond. Otto the Great, in the 9th century, captured pagan Slavs and sold them into slavery. The Seljuk and Ottoman Turks used the same method against their African and European slaves. In fact, 20% of their populations were slaves. In the mid-14th century, Ottoman Sultan Murad I built an army of slaves, referred to as the Kapukulu. The Desvirme system allowed for promotion and advancement if they converted to Islam, such as within the Janissary Corps. Other slaves were kept for hard labor and basically worked to death. It is believed by many historians that Sultan Mehmed II established the first open commercial Ottoman slave market in Constantinople in the 1460s, following the model already used throughout Turkey, replacing the former Byzantine slave market. Historian Nicolas de Nicolay states that there were slaves of all ages and both sexes, often displayed naked, to be thoroughly checked, and this was true of children and young women for potential buyers. For 600 years, the Ottomans practiced the largest slave trade in history, and sometimes it was brutal. Historian Madeline C. Zilfi chronicles that under both Arab and Ottoman rule, black Africans were considered inferior to European and Caucasian slaves, and therefore less valuable, therefore expendable.
And this is where lines kind of get crossed. I had one video that I was going to do, but I decided not to because it kind of made it feel like the guy wasn't really telling the whole truth. And then I watched the whole damn video, come to find out that his ass got all the information off of Google. I don't even use Google for a lot of my information anymore because it's very biased. He made it seem as if white slaves, like that they cost less than black slaves, which I knew was not true because they have the caste system. So Africans were always at the bottom. The darker you were at the bottom. And then above Africans, it would be the Native Americans. Above the Native Americans, it would be the mixed breeds. Above the mixed breeds, those would be the ones who were pretty much combining with European blood. They would be at the top. So the lighter that you are, and you could see that in any nation, eventually it kind of changed over time because they realized that the darker you are, the easier it is for you to be in sun for long periods of time. If you are enjoying this content so far, please click that bell.
These slaves were not considered to be valuable, as they were easily replaced, unlike the black slaves from Africa who were considered quite valuable to the English, Portuguese, and Spanish colonial powers in particular.
Didn't I tell you that eventually it kind of switched up? See how at first he was saying that they were the lowest, and now they're valuable to certain people. It's just crazy to see how you enslaved your own damn people. Like, who the fuck? Like, these people were assholes. I'm a firm believer that these were like fallen angels. Like, these were like demons for real. Because there's no way that you had a soul in any kind of way to take innocent people and put them through such horrible conditions just so you can make some money because your lazy ass couldn't do it. Like, look at them. Y'all grown as hell. Why y'all couldn't do what they was doing? Why y'all had to go get somebody else from a whole nother country in order to do jobs that your asses could have did? Just lazy. But now black folks looked at as lazy. Yeah, all right.
To the Muslims, they were almost worthless. But many people want to do a comparison between the Atlantic African slave trade and other forms of slavery. When it comes to sheer volume, the Arabic and Ottoman slave trades lasted 900 years longer and enslaved tens of millions more than the 13 to 14 million taken from Africa by the Europeans. More sub-Saharan Africans were sold to the Islamic world than to Europe and the Western Hemisphere combined. There were more Europeans enslaved by North Africans than there were sub-Saharan Africans enslaved and sent to the Western Hemisphere. This was slavery based upon race, so it was not created by Europeans. It was also based upon religion. Non-Muslims, as I said before, were targets. In fact, the Europeans were very late to the party and basically amateurs when it came to slavery. The Spanish and Portuguese were the most effective, taking over 90% of the Africans for their colonial empires starting in the mid-15th century. The English actively entered the slave trade over 100 years later. Millions of Muslim slaves were Slavic Christians, among many other Christian ethnic groups. However, what is of interest was that if Christians or other non-Muslim groups paid tribute, basically paying taxes or bribes, then this often prevented the taking of slaves in most cases. It was a protection racket. This was also true of the Ottomans for the most part, but not necessarily for the Arab cultures who still exacted tribute, but often still raided for slaves all over Europe and East and Central Africa, such as the East African and Barbary slave trades. Slavery for life was not unusual, and the children of slaves inherited that status in many cases. Punishments in their society ranged from impaling, flogging, burning, hanging, and beheading. All were normal punishments in Muslim culture, but for a slave to escape and be recaptured or simply charged with a crime, these punishments, execution by any means, were standard procedures. This was mainly due to the vast numbers of potential slaves that cost nothing to acquire and were worked to death in various ways. Ottoman and Arab slavers took their slaves from territories they either raided or had conquered, requiring no expense for obtaining free labor. A century after the Western societies ended legal slavery, the Young Turks adopted an anti-slavery stance in the early 20th century. As stated by historians Clarence Smith and William Gervais, Sultan Abdul Hamid II's personal slaves were freed in 1909, but members of his dynasty were allowed to keep their slaves, and, finally, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk ended legal slavery in the Turkish Republic. However, Turkey waited until 1933 to ratify the 1926 League of Nations Convention on the Suppression of Slavery. Nonetheless, illegal sales of girls were reportedly continued at least into the early 1930s, and the legislation explicitly prohibiting slavery was not adopted until 1964. In other Muslim countries, slavery also lasted longer than in the West, with Saudi Arabia finally ending legal slavery in 1962.
Damn,
Legal
it took
slavery
y'all that
lasted
long?
in the Islamic world from the 6th century well into the 20th century. Muslim slavers operated from Europe, Africa, and Asia to the Indian Ocean, which involved hundreds of millions of people being slaves. Yes, Muslim slave trading was the greatest in history, and it still exists today, only it is not openly practiced nor endorsed by any government.
Bullshit. Bullshit. I don't believe that. In fact, I find it quite uncomfortable that this government in this country is so comfortable with just letting them come over here and bring their traditions, their country, and create their own communities in our country. Texas is one of those states that they were getting ready to build I believe it was going to be like 1,000 houses there for their own community, where they would bring their own laws and have their own education system, their own funerals and everything. No, fuck that. I always would feel some type of way about people coming over here from other countries, bringing their own country. And I just think that it's odd that all over the world, I hate saying this because I don't want to sound like I'm being racist or discriminating against Muslims, but I just think that it's really odd that like all over the world, like places like the UK have been overrun by this community. And now here in America, they're just okay to just come over here, be a part of our government, create their own laws, be in communities to where now their prayer 5 times a day has to be put on speakers, even though this is a country that was built on Christian values. But I understand that there's freedom of religion here. But how is that freedom when I'm being forced to hear your way of prayer 5 times a day. That's not freedom. That's forceful religion. This is very scary. Every American needs to pay attention to this. They really do. Like I said on my channel, look, I'm an equal opportunity smoke giver. I give smoke to everybody. I always like to create dialogue and create conversations that are going to benefit everyone. This right here is scary. If that mindset, obviously they're still doing it. If they bring that over to our country already got enough shit that it's trying to sift through. The last thing that we need to be doing is sifting through somebody else's shit that they're bringing from their own country over to ours. And that's just real truth. All right, y'all. Well, I'm gonna get up out of here. That was just crazy. That was crazy. I've never seen this. Like I said, I watch a lot of his videos. This wasn't even the one that I was gonna do. I wasn't even gonna do this one. I was looking for the one about the Irish slaves. I felt like that this was really interesting because people, especially like Black Americans, think that like our story of slavery, there's no doubt in my mind that it was terrible. We also got to understand that a lot of slavery was brought here by like a lot of these people that they just showed. They came over here and bought their way of life, bought their way of living. You heard what he just said, that the Spaniards and the Portuguese, they were very okay. They were very much so happy with enslaving Africans. So no wonder why they were going over to other countries in North America and over in Mesoamerica, and they just easily just took over people's countries and took over people's lands who was just minding their own damn business. And then when they went over there, they bought all kinds of diseases and shit. So ever since they touched the country, they didn't bring nothing but bad stuff. I just pray I see the day that a lot of these people get their just due. There's people who still reap the benefits of slavery today. And I hope I live to see the day that you lose everything, that you get to suffer the way that these people suffered. I mean that like with my whole soul, straight up. But I'm gonna get up out of here, y'all. Let me know what you all think about this video. It's definitely an interesting take. Videos like this really kind of open one's eyes because, like I said, they're not making any movies about white slavery. Aside from like Gladiator definitely showed like a form of white slavery, and it also showed that white slaves were enslaved with Africans. If we understand that our histories are similar, we wouldn't have a need for superiority complex. We wouldn't have a need for people to be inferior of other people. And we wouldn't have the need for people to think that they have control over other people's lives based upon the culture that they're from. Thank y'all so much for watching. Yeah. Peace.
Just trying to stay sucker free in a world full of lollipops. I'm seeing all the ops. Fake news, fake views. It's an illness, the cure to the sick shit. It's the pretty realist.